In senior year of high school, Talia Monroe thought she could finally enjoy a bit of peace. She had kept her head down, studied hard, and avoided drama. But that didn't stop Reagan Pierce, the popular football player with an ego bigger than the stadium, from humiliating her. One afternoon during lunch, Reagan loudly joked to his friends that Talia was good for hookups, not for wifing. His voice echoed across the cafeteria like he wanted everyone to hear. People laughed, but none louder than his girlfriend, Kennedy Sloan, the cheer captain with a talent for cruelty and a smile that never reached her eyes. Talia froze. She hadn't even done anything to deserve that level of public disrespect. She'd never even spoken to Reagan outside of group projects. The comment wasn't just mean, it stuck. People started whispering behind her back. Girls side-eyed her in the hallway. Boys suddenly acted like they had permission to talk to her any kind of way. Overnight, her reputation turned into a joke. And Reagan? He didn't care. He played the victim when teachers asked questions, smiling like he was above it all. Kennedy added fuel to the fire online, dropping cryptic posts that everyone knew were about Talia. It was brutal. Talia wanted to disappear. She cried in the school bathroom more times than she could count, but no one saw that part. All they saw was the girl who got called trash by the golden boy and laughed at by the cheer queen. Her grades dipped. She skipped senior prom. She barely showed up for graduation. Reagan and Kennedy walked across that stage with their heads high like they'd won something. And maybe they had back then. But what no one knew was that Talia had a plan. That pain didn't break her, it built her. Every snide comment, every whisper, every fake laugh, she stored it. Let it burn slow inside her like fuel. While they partied through senior summer, she worked. She applied for scholarships, got into college, and studied harder than ever. She changed her look, sharpened her mind, built herself from the inside out. Talia was done being the joke. What Reagan and Kennedy thought would be her downfall turned out to be the moment that shaped her future. And she promised herself one thing: they'd see her again. Not the girl they laughed at, the woman they couldn't ignore, the one they wished they never underestimated. Talia thought she'd heard the worst back in senior year, but nothing stung like what she overheard one week after graduation. She was at a friend's backyard party, just trying to blend in, when she heard Kennedy's voice slicing through the crowd. "Talia will never be anything more than a warm body," she said with a sharp laugh. "She's forgettable. She's nothing." Talia stood frozen behind a hedge, the cup in her hand trembling. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. That sentence wrapped around her like chains. It wasn't just Reagan anymore. It was Kennedy, too, still mocking her like high school hadn't ended. Talia left the party without saying a word. She walked home in silence, the sounds of laughter still ringing in her ears. She didn't cry. She felt numb, like all her energy had been drained. It wasn't just what Kennedy said. It was the fact that people agreed. No one stood up for her. No one told Kennedy to stop. In that moment, Talia realized that if she stayed, she would keep reliving the same pain, the same humiliation, the same shame. So she made a choice that night. She was done being the girl people thought they could mock and forget. Without telling anyone, not even her closest cousin, Talia packed her bags. She blocked every contact from high school, deleted her socials, and vanished. She didn't leave a note, no goodbye text. She just disappeared. Moved to a new city, enrolled in community college under her full name, Talia Monroe, and told no one where she was. She didn't want pity. She didn't want apologies. She wanted distance. She wanted silence. She wanted a clean slate. The first months were hard. She didn't know anyone. She had no support system. Some nights, she ate ramen and cried alone in a tiny apartment with thin walls and a broken heater. But every time she felt weak, those words echoed in her head. A warm body, a forgettable nothing. That pain became her reason, her fuel, her fire. She studied relentlessly, worked 2 part-time jobs, and pushed herself harder than ever. She stopped seeking approval. She stopped waiting to be seen. Instead, she focused on becoming someone who couldn't be ignored. She looked in the mirror and refused to see the girl they used to mock. She saw someone rebuilding herself from scratch. She changed her style, her voice, her mindset. She signed up for classes that scared her, took on leadership roles, said yes to things she never would have in the past. No one in her new life knew about Reagan or Kennedy. No one whispered behind her back. She became known for her work ethic, her kindness, her strength. The shame they tried to drown her in became her armor. Talia didn't just escape. She transformed. She wasn't running from her past. She was building a future they wouldn't recognize. And someday she knew they'd see her again. Only this time, they wouldn't be able to laugh. Talia landed in Dallas with nothing but 2 suitcases and a fire in her chest. No friends, no family, no plan except one: become someone no one could ignore. She changed her number the moment she arrived, deleted every trace of her old life. The Talia Monroe people used to laugh at didn't exist anymore. From that day forward, she was focused. No drama, no distractions, no looking back. She found a tiny room in a shared apartment on the edge of town. It was barely big enough for a bed and a desk, but it was hers. She got a job waiting tables during the day, stocked shelves at a grocery store at night, and cleaned offices on weekends. She didn't complain. Every dollar she earned went toward college. While other girls were posting selfies and going on dates, Talia was studying in break rooms and taking online classes in the early hours of the morning. She didn't have time for parties. She didn't need validation. Her only focus was to build a future on her terms. The days blurred together. Sometimes she worked 18 hours straight. Some nights she cried herself to sleep from exhaustion, but she never quit. She didn't want anyone's pity, just progress. She ate simple meals, stretched every dollar, and avoided anything that didn't bring her closer to her goal. People at work noticed her dedication. Professors admired her discipline. She was always early, always prepared, always pushing. They called her driven. They didn't know she was running from a past where people treated her like nothing. She turned down every date, ignored every flirt. She wasn't interested, not because she didn't want love, but because she couldn't afford to lose focus. She'd seen what love looked like back home: used, tossed aside, laughed at. She wasn't risking that again, so she built walls, high ones, and behind them, she grew stronger. With each semester, she climbed higher. She earned scholarships, made the dean's list, and started tutoring other students for extra cash. She kept her circle small, her goals big. She didn't post her progress online. She wanted her success to speak for itself, not chase claps from people who once laughed at her. Her name became known around campus, not for drama, not for scandal, but for excellence. The girl who showed up tired but never late, who had nothing but gave everything. Dallas became her blank slate, her training ground, her rebirth. Every long shift, every quiet night, every lonely walk home, it all added up. She was rewriting her story line by line, sacrifice by sacrifice. And while the world kept spinning, Talia Monroe kept rising. She didn't need revenge. She needed results. She didn't chase attention. She chased purpose. And with every passing day, she got closer to the life no one thought she could build. By 28, Talia Monroe had become the kind of woman people noticed when she entered a room. Not because she was loud or flashy, but because she moved with quiet power. Years of sacrifice had paid off. She had built Monroe Analytics from scratch, a tech consulting firm that started with one laptop at her kitchen table and grew into a multi-million-dollar company. She went from answering phones and scheduling meetings to sitting at the head of the table, running her own boardroom. Her journey wasn't overnight. It took years of working behind the scenes, taking small contracts no one else wanted, delivering results that made people talk. She focused on data and strategy, helping businesses make smarter decisions. Word spread. One satisfied client turned into 5, then 10. She never chased attention, just excellence. Every project she touched brought results, and every result brought more respect. Talia dressed the part too. Sharp suits, clean lines, heels that clicked with purpose. She didn't just look successful, she carried it. She spoke with clarity, moved with confidence, and made decisions with zero hesitation. When she talked, people listened. Investors, partners, clients, they all saw the same thing: a leader who earned her place. But Talia never forgot where she came from. Her office walls weren't covered in flashy awards. Instead, there were handwritten notes from her first few clients, a photo of her old apartment, and the notebook she used to plan her company's first year. She kept those things close, not to brag, but to remember. Every win was rooted in pain, in humiliation, in nights no one else saw. She made it a point to hire women who had been overlooked, doubted, or underestimated. She created internships for students with no connections, just potential. She gave them what no one gave her: a chance. Her company culture was built on respect, results, and resilience. She ran Monroe Analytics like the kind of company she once dreamed of working for when no one would give her a shot. Despite her success, Talia never craved the spotlight. She rarely posted about her achievements. Her focus was always forward, but people noticed anyway. Business magazines asked for interviews. News outlets named her one of the top young CEOs to watch. Clients flew across the country just to work with her. And every time someone asked, "How did you do it?" she gave the same answer. Discipline. Nothing else. She didn't mention Reagan or Kennedy, not yet. Their names weren't worth her breath. But deep inside, she hadn't forgotten. They were part of the fire that shaped her, part of the reason she never settled. Talia Monroe had rewritten her story. The girl they once laughed at was now the woman leading one of the fastest-growing firms in the country. And while she wore success like armor, she carried her past like a compass, never letting it define her, but always letting it remind her. 10 years after leaving everything behind, Talia was sitting in her sleek corner office when her assistant knocked and said, "You have an interview scheduled with a candidate named Marcus Sloan." The name didn't hit her at first. It was just another line in a busy day. She reviewed the file, scanned the resume, strong background, decent experience, but nothing special. She grabbed her tablet and headed to the interview room without a second thought. The moment she walked in, everything changed. He stood to greet her, but as soon as he saw her face, the color drained from his. Marcus Sloan, Kennedy's husband, the man she remembered from high school parties and graduation day photos. His eyes widened in disbelief. He stammered something that didn't make sense. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. Meanwhile, Talia didn't flinch. She simply extended her hand with a calm smile and said, "Mr. Sloan, I'm Talia Monroe, CEO of Monroe Analytics." The silence that followed was loud. He shook her hand, but his grip was weak. She sat across from him, fully composed, and started the interview like she would with any other candidate. "Tell me about your background," she said. He was sweating, fumbling through his words, clearly shaken. She didn't bring up the past, didn't remind him who she used to be. She didn't need to. Her presence said it all. Marcus kept trying to act professional, but he couldn't stop glancing at her. There was confusion in his eyes, mixed with guilt. He kept stuttering, losing his train of thought. He wasn't prepared for this. He didn't expect the girl who was once laughed at to be sitting across the table in full control. He probably thought she'd vanished after high school. He had no idea she'd become the boss of the company he was desperate to work for. Talia didn't show even a hint of emotion. She asked tough questions. She pushed him on technical details. She analyzed his answers the same way she did every candidate. No anger, no revenge speech, just poise, power, precision. The man who once stood beside Kennedy, laughing at Talia like she was nothing, was now begging with his eyes for her approval. By the end of the interview, Marcus looked like he wanted to disappear. He thanked her quietly, almost under his breath, and left the room as fast as he could. Talia sat there for a moment after he was gone, not to gloat, just to breathe. It wasn't revenge she felt. It was clarity, closure, proof that she hadn't just survived the past, she had risen far above it. The next day, her team asked for feedback on Marcus. Talia gave a short, professional answer. Not the right fit. That was it. No explanations, no callbacks. She didn't need to explain anything. Her success was the loudest response. The interview didn't shake her, it shook him, and that was all she needed. Talia acted like she didn't recognize Marcus. Not even a flicker of memory on her face. Just a polite, professional welcome email, like she gave every new hire. Marcus probably breathed a sigh of relief, thinking maybe she didn't remember who he was. Or maybe he thought she was too far removed from the past to care. Either way, he was wrong. Talia remembered every word, every laugh, every look he and Kennedy gave her back in high school. But now she had the power, and she knew exactly how to use it. She let Marcus settle in, gave him standard onboarding, a decent desk, and access to the team. At first, he walked around the office like he belonged, cracking jokes, trying to impress. He talked a lot, promised even more, but Talia just watched, quietly, carefully. She paid attention to his reports, his deadlines, his excuses, and it didn't take long before the cracks showed. So she started assigning him work that required real effort, real knowledge, real discipline. Things she knew someone like him, who coasted through charm and shortcuts, wouldn't handle well. First, it was a client analytics project with a tight deadline. He submitted it late and filled with errors. She didn't scold him. She just corrected it herself and passed it on to the client. No reaction, no drama, just silence. Then she gave him a logistics report for a high-value partner. He claimed he didn't get the memo, claimed the system glitched. Talia nodded, smiled, and told him to try again. Next was a pitch presentation. He recycled old slides, didn't bother researching. When the client canceled the deal, he blamed the market. Again, she didn't raise her voice, just took notes. Week after week, she watched him unravel. The man who once smirked with arrogance was now drowning in responsibilities he wasn't prepared for. He started staying late, trying to cover his mistakes, whispered to coworkers for help, missed deadlines, looked tired, nervous, unsure of himself. Still, Talia never treated him unfairly. Everything she gave him was within his job title. She just stopped protecting him like the world always had. The team noticed too. Quiet whispers around the office. How did he even get hired? Why does he always look stressed? Talia doesn't seem impressed, but she said nothing, didn't confirm or deny. She let his own work speak for him, and it screamed louder every day. Marcus tried to win her over a few times, dropped comments about how crazy small the world is, even joked once, "You ever go to Northbridge High?" She looked him in the eye and said, "Can't say I remember much from that time," then turned back to her laptop. Talia didn't need revenge in the form of shouting or drama. She used performance metrics, expectations, accountability. She watched as Marcus slowly became a shell of the cocky guy who once laughed at her pain. The power shift wasn't loud. It was quiet, controlled, and deeply satisfying, because now she wasn't just the girl he once mocked. She was his boss, and he was failing under her watch. It was the company's annual dinner, an elegant evening filled with music, speeches, and glowing lights. Talia arrived last as always, dressed in a sleek black gown, calm and confident. She walked through the room with quiet authority. Heads turned, people smiled, and employees nodded respectfully. She owned the space without saying a word. Marcus was already there. He looked nervous but tried to hide it behind a half-hearted smile. And clinging tightly to his arm was Kennedy. Same Kennedy from high school, but older, sharper, louder. She wore a bright red dress like she wanted all the attention. She laughed too loudly, talked too much. She didn't recognize Talia from afar. Why would she? She never really looked at her back then either. As the dinner progressed, introductions made their way across the room. When one of the board members gestured toward Talia and said, "Come meet our founder and CEO, Talia Monroe," Kennedy spun around casually. And that's when it hit her. She stared at Talia like she was seeing a ghost. Her lips parted, but no words came out. She reached for her wine glass, took a sip, then coughed so hard it nearly came out her nose. Talia smiled calmly. "Nice to meet you," she said, extending a hand. Kennedy didn't take it at first. She just stared, stunned. Finally, she grabbed Talia's hand, eyes wide, voice shaking. You're the CEO?" Talia gave a small nod. "Yes, since the beginning." Marcus didn't say a word. He stood stiff beside Kennedy, clearly wishing he could vanish into the wall. His face was pale. The humiliation was thick in the air. Kennedy tried to recover, laughing awkwardly, saying something about how amazing it was to run into old faces. But Talia didn't give her anything. No mention of high school, no emotion, just grace and confidence. The rest of the evening, Kennedy couldn't stop glancing across the room. Her smile faded. She barely touched her food. She watched as employees walked up to Talia with admiration, watched the respect she commanded, watched her glow in a room full of power and success. Kennedy had come hoping to flaunt, but the tables turned so fast she couldn't catch her breath. At one point, Kennedy leaned into Marcus and whispered something. His face tensed. He shook his head. She stood up and headed for the restroom, but not before stealing one last look at Talia. That look said everything. Regret, disbelief, maybe even jealousy. Talia stayed composed all night. She didn't brag, didn't gloat. She didn't have to. Her life did the talking. The girl they once laughed at, the one Kennedy said was nothing more than a warm body, was now the most powerful person in the room. And Kennedy, she was just someone in a red dress, standing beside a man barely holding onto his job, choking on the realization that the past she mocked had grown into a future she could never reach. It all came crashing down on a Tuesday morning. A client emailed about inconsistencies in their quarterly report. Numbers didn't add up, charts looked off, and timelines were missing. Talia already had her suspicions. Marcus had been slipping, but this time, it wasn't just laziness. It was deliberate. She pulled the files herself and compared them to the originals. He had altered figures, fudged data, misled a major client, and then he signed off on it. She didn't confront him right away. She called for a boardroom meeting, quietly looped in HR, the legal department, and every senior VP. She even made sure Kennedy was present, under the excuse of spousal support and transparency. Since Marcus often bragged about his wife's interest in his career, the room was tense as everyone took their seats. Marcus strolled in, pretending to be relaxed, but he looked confused when he saw the people gathered. Then he saw Kennedy, and his smile faltered. Talia walked in last, a thick folder in her hand, and calm fire in her eyes. She didn't waste time. She projected the forged reports on the screen, slide by slide, line by line. She explained exactly what was changed, when, and how it violated company policy and client trust. Then she showed the emails, his approvals, his signatures, his excuses. Nobody spoke. You could hear a pin drop. Marcus tried to interrupt. It was a misunderstanding, he started, voice shaky. Talia didn't raise her voice. She just looked him dead in the eye and said, "You falsified client data. That's fraud." Kennedy gasped. HR leaned forward. Legal nodded once. Then Talia handed the termination letter across the table. "Effective immediately," she said, her voice calm but final. "Your access is being revoked. HR will escort you out after this meeting." Marcus's mouth opened and closed like he wanted to beg, explain, defend, but there was nothing left to say. He looked around the room and saw no allies. Not one. Kennedy's face turned red. She stood up and whispered harshly, "Are you serious?" Marcus ignored her. He looked at Talia with a mix of fear and disbelief. "You're ruining my career," he said. Talia raised an eyebrow. "You ruined your own career. I just documented it." The meeting ended in silence. Marcus sat frozen for a moment. Then HR stood and motioned for him to follow. He stood slowly, eyes on the floor, shoulders slumped. Kennedy followed behind him, but not before turning to glare at Talia. Talia didn't blink. No yelling, no chaos, just consequences. Clean, cold, and fully deserved. The same man who once mocked her in high school was now being walked out of her building like a disgraced intern. And Talia? She remained seated at the head of the table, untouched, unmoved, and completely in control. The boardroom emptied, and all that remained was the silence of justice finally served. A week after the boardroom firing, Talia was catching up on reports late at night when a new email popped up. The subject line was blank, but the name caught her eye. Kennedy Sloan. She hadn't heard from her since that night at the company dinner. Curiosity made her open it. It was a short message. No fluff, no drama. Just one line. "I'm sorry. I was young and stupid." Talia stared at the screen for a moment. For years, she had carried the sting of Kennedy's laughter in high school. The whispers, the cruel comments, the way she dismissed her like she didn't matter. And now this. An apology after everything. Not in person, not on the phone. Just a cold sentence in an email. She didn't feel anger. Not anymore. That had burned out years ago. What she felt now was something else. Clarity. Kennedy wasn't reaching out because she had changed. She was reaching out because she had finally seen Talia win. It wasn't about guilt. It was about regret. Regret that Talia had become everything Kennedy said she never would. Talia didn't think twice. She typed her reply in one calm, clear sentence. "I healed, but I didn't forget." Then she hit send. No lecture. No emotional breakdown. Just truth. She closed her laptop and leaned back in her chair. The past no longer had a grip on her. She wasn't the girl desperate for approval. She wasn't the girl who needed to be seen. She was a woman who had built herself from the ground up, and she didn't need an apology to validate that. The apology was for Kennedy. The peace was Talia's alone. That email exchange was the final chapter in a story that had started with cruel words in a school hallway. A story of shame, pain, hard work, reinvention, and triumph. Kennedy thought one sentence could undo years of damage, but Talia knew better. Growth doesn't come with shortcuts, and forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It just releases its hold. The next morning, she arrived at her office early. Her staff greeted her with admiration, respect, and warmth. She poured her coffee, reviewed her schedule, and smiled. Her life was full now, of purpose, of pride, of power. She'd been broken once, but she built herself stronger. She remembered every word said to her, not to stay angry, but to never forget how far she'd come. Kennedy's email was a whisper from the past. Talia's reply was a closing door. 3 months later, Talia stood in front of a camera, the lights warm on her skin, a crisp navy suit hugging her shoulders. The photographer clicked away as the makeup artist adjusted a strand of hair. Everyone in the room knew who she was, the woman who went from invisible to unstoppable, the woman who now graced the cover of Forbes 40 Under 40, not because of scandal, not because of drama, but because she earned every piece of it. The headline read, "Monroe Analytics, the quiet rise of a relentless visionary." She didn't need to smile big. Her presence did the talking. Her eyes said everything. Not pride, not revenge, just power. Quiet, earned, undeniable power. After the shoot, she stepped out onto the balcony of her downtown office. The city stretched wide before her, Dallas pulsing beneath the skyline. Her assistant called from behind her, asking if she'd like a driver for her next meeting. She shook her head. "I'll walk," she said. She liked walking. She liked the way her heels clicked on pavement now. Every step a reminder that she had paved her own way. She thought about the girl she used to be, the one who cried quietly in locker rooms, the one who disappeared after graduation, humiliated and alone. That girl had no voice, no protection, no idea she'd ever matter. And yet she mattered now. Not one word from Reagan, not another from Kennedy. And she didn't expect any. There was nothing left to say. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was the space success created when you no longer had anything to prove. She led board meetings with grace. She signed deals with confidence. She mentored young women who once sat where she had, overlooked, dismissed, underestimated. And she told them, you don't need them to see you, you just need to see yourself. She didn't post about the past, didn't drag anyone's name through the mud. Her victory wasn't loud, it was solid. It was in the numbers, in the headlines, in the way even her silence demanded attention. There were nights she went home alone. No husband, no partner, just quiet. But it didn't feel empty. It felt earned. She wasn't waiting for anyone to complete her. She had built something complete all on her own. She looked at the framed magazine cover on her desk the next day. It was more than a picture. It was proof, not of revenge, but of rising, not of getting even, but of getting ahead. Talia didn't chase validation. She didn't need an audience. Her life wasn't a performance anymore. It was her power, and she carried it not with arrogance, but with quiet certainty. She led alone now, but never ever powerless.